Yeah, so this is going to be a web-based presentation, so feel free to go to here and follow along, or later on, or whatever. Again, yeah, if I start to doze off, don't take it personally. Yeah, I have been up for about 28 hours straight, but I'm super stoked to give this talk because modules, there's a bazillion modules, and there's tons of ways you can actually build products with Node. And I wanted to give sort of like an overview, a high-level talk about my experience doing that and why I think it's important. So we'll start off with the obligatory self-promotion slide. So I'm Joe Mccann on Twitter. Follow me there. Also on GitHub, same thing. I am a partner at the Node firm, and I blog occasionally about all kinds of various topics at subprint.com. Subprint, as Ian mentioned, is my sort of side consultancy, but my real job is I'm a mobile architect at Bizarre Voice. I created a couple things called PhotoPipe and Dillinger and a couple of products and whatnot. I'll go into those later. And big fan of open source and the open source philosophy. So, show of hands. It's pretty good. Anybody got a guess on this one?
16,432.
Yes.
Bingo.
Well, actually. So yes, literally right now, there's 16,195 modules. And in another couple minutes, this will probably be 16,200 or something, right? There are so many modules, it's mind-blowing, it's awesome, it's great. It actually enables people like me to be able to write apps and build products really easily. And if you want, you can also, I wrote this little thing, this npm-count.jitsu, which is, it's literally, it's all it shows you is how many Node modules are currently written. It turns out, the way I wrote npm-count.jitsu was screen scraping npmjs.org. And Michael's like, why didn't you just hit the CouchDB data? What's wrong with you? I'm like, no, it would have been fun that way. So screen scraping, really easy with Node, by the way, if you haven't tried that. So right, 16,195 modules, tons and tons of modules. And more on the way, and we should certainly be writing more and more modules. I love it. The more that come out, the better, frankly, in my opinion. Now, sure, there is some overlap, but I think it's okay. There'll be some sort of consolidation along the way eventually. It's typically how these types of things work. So that's how many I've written. Just absolutely shameful. I mean, seriously. And you know the thing is, it's not that I didn't want to. It's that for the most part, when I actually when I go to write a module, there's already 4 modules already written for that, right? Which is a really, really, really good thing, right? Especially for someone like me. I'm going to have to refresh this. This is dangerous. Okay, good. Because I am on the Wi-Fi here. So I haven't written a lot of modules, 0 at this point, but I have actually built a few products or apps. I call them products because, I don't know, it sounds a little more marketing friendly, I guess. But no, seriously, the reason I call them products is because of the way that I've actually tried to go to market with them or package them up or promote them or whatever. And that's what I've done a lot with Node, and I want to share a little bit of my experience doing that, particularly with this app called Gunner. Gunner is, in essence, a desktop app that runs on Mac that allows you to drag and drop files, and it uploads to a Rackspace cloud. That's all it does. But the reason I wrote this was when I was, about a year ago, I was living in Amsterdam, and I found myself constantly having to go to the web interface through Rackspace to upload files. And I don't know if anybody's used that, but it is shit. It's horrible. They have a beautiful API though. Like their API is just, well, it's gorgeous, right? So I thought to myself, okay, I'm having to go to this crappy website constantly to upload assets. Why not just build something that will enable me to just launch this little app, drag stuff in, and it's good. So that's exactly what I did. I used Node to do this, but I didn't use Node in the traditional sense. Like, a lot of people think when I use Node, I have to be building some sort of web application. And that's simply not the case. I think one of the most powerful things about Node is the ability to use it as part of your development tool chain, or it's like another tool in your arsenal, so to speak. And so what I did with Gunner was, Gunner is actually if anybody's familiar with Accelerator Titanium, they actually have they have Accelerator Titanium Mobile, which is their sort of core product right now. It allows you to build native apps using JavaScript, native mobile apps using JavaScript. But initially, the company had a desktop product that was 100% HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. They've since sunsetted that particular product. It's open source, but at the time I used it because we should be able to do this. This is easy, right? This is just standard sort of XHR. It's no big deal. And it worked great. The UI was in HTML, CSS, no real problems there. But what was interesting to me was the reason I used Node to actually develop the app was it was way faster to do it. So using Node as a tool to generate UI, using Node as a tool to actually build the Titanium app was incredibly empowering because you weren't having to use sort of proprietary tools to do that sort of stuff. You could just write a Node script that would do a lot of this for you. And it turned out really well. This next bit is an app or product that I call Dillinger, which is, in essence, a more standard sort of web app. And it's a markdown editor. Real-time, what you see is what you get, markdown editor. It's at dillinger.io. And it does things like, essentially I had a problem where I was constantly having to edit markdown files, particularly for GitHub repos. And I didn't want to have to, I don't know, open TextMate or the editor. I wanted to be able to actually write markdown and see it, right? So a common theme of the way that I actually build any of my products or apps is I'm trying to actually solve my own problem. And Dillinger did that for me. So initially when I wrote Dillinger, it had a feature of it linked with your GitHub account. You could pull in markdown files from GitHub, modify them, etc. And I was like, well, this would be cool if we could add Dropbox to it. And so now it has Dropbox syncing, it has GitHub capability, you can modify theme. It uses the ACE editor, which is what Cloud9 uses, which is a badass JavaScript project, by the way. And I'll talk a little bit more about Dillinger in detail, but just wanted to give you a sort of a lay of the land of some of the stuff I've been working on. Finally, this particular project is something that's, very new, called PhotoPipe. I had another problem that I needed to solve, and that was the inability to actually just upload, like say on Facebook. You can't just give Facebook a URL of a photo and then your status and hit submit. I thought that's just, it should just be so easy to do something like that. So I thought, well, I could write a really quick node service that'll just literally take the URL, pipe it to Facebook's API. And so that's how PhotoPipe was born. And now I've just gone like full gong show and added Dropbox and Instagram and Twitter and all kinds of stuff. So naturally, you start with one little thing and it goes crazy. But the difference between PhotoPipe and Dillinger and Gunner is Gunner used Node as a development tool. Dillinger is more of your standard web application. PhotoPipe is actually what I'm calling like sort of a network application. So the use of PhotoPipe is a service. It's not, there's certainly a web interface, but the point is that if you wanted to use PhotoPipe inside, say, a native iPad app, you could use PhotoPipe as a native. It doesn't require a web browser. And that's one of the directions I'd like to see more of us when we're starting to build apps or products in general, is start to think more around building network applications and clients communicating to each other on networks, and not just think, oh, I have to build a web app. Web app certainly is one of those endpoints, but it could be multiple other endpoints as well. So I can build products, but I can't write a module. it's not actually entirely true. I mean, the reality is that I just like to build things. I'm sure a lot of us in the room do as well. Every time I go to look to build a module, it's already there. It's not a cop-out, I'm serious, every single time. So the reality is, I think, for a lot of us, writing plugins, like I remember years ago, people would write awesome jQuery plugins, right? There's jQuery plugins, people were writing just overall libraries, then the whole micro library thing started, and now we've got modules in Node, over 16,000 of them. That's fantastic. Some people are really good at doing that sort of thing. So visually, you can think of it like the individual pieces of the Voltron, right? Those are the modules. I couldn't figure out the best way to visualize this. This is the only thing I thought of, so we'll have to roll with it. Now, on the flip side, there's people like myself who I think are actually better at taking all those modules and actually assembling them into an actual product. So you can think of you guys have Voltron in Ireland, right? No? Yes? Okay. So it's assembling all the modules together to create a product. That's sort of on the other half. And it doesn't mean that you can't be both. It doesn't mean you can't write modules, you can't build a product. But a lot of times, people tend to lean towards one or the other. So what I'm suggesting to people, particularly those who are just ripping module authors, is like, take some of that and actually go build something with it. Not that you haven't already. So a lot of people have actually, but think about it and think, the next time I want to build something, why not build an actual product or an app? And even if it's what I call uselessware, just for the process of it is actually a good exercise. So really quickly, how do I actually get started going about building some sort of node-based product? Well, the first thing, and my recommendation, this is from my own experience, is really sort of adopting the Unix philosophy that I think a lot of what we've heard earlier today, and probably will continue to hear, is writing modules that do discrete things really, really well, right? There's a reason for that, and I'll go into that when I talk a little bit about Dillinger, that adopting this sort of mentality will actually make a better product in the end. I thought I killed Dropbox, by the way, so I guess I didn't. Sorry about that. So the Unix philosophy is great for modules themselves, but I also really want to stress the point that if you're building any sort of product in general, particularly node products, it makes sense to actually structure your application architecture in a super modular way. The reason is, I learned this the hard way. When I originally launched Dillinger, which is just that online markdown editor, it worked fine. You could import stuff from GitHub, you could save stuff to Dropbox. That was great. I think Remy Sharp was the only person that was incapable of using it for some reason. I don't know what the... Seriously, he would hit me up and I'm like, what is wrong with my session? I'm like, nah, user error. So yeah, Dillinger 1.0 worked fine. But the way that the code was actually structured was not modular. And it used a bunch of really badass plugins, by the way, and still does to this day. But it wasn't modular. So what I mean by the code's architecture itself not being modular, well, if I wanted to all of a sudden add, say, Google Drive support, the way that Dillinger 1.0 was actually set up was it was a monolith, or a monolithic application. The way I originally wrote it was, I just need the ability to import stuff from GitHub, so I'm just going to write my app to be centered around that. And then I was bolting shit onto it, and that was a really, really bad idea. So if I wanted to add Google Drive support, I had to make sure that the GitHub thing still worked, the Dropbox thing still worked, and essentially you started to build this monolithic application. And that's a really bad design pattern, in my opinion. In addition to that, if somebody, so Dillinger, by the way, all the apps, all the things that I'm mentioning are 100% open source. They're all on GitHub, MIT licensed, so feel free to take and do whatever you want. The problem with a monolith like Dillinger 1.0 was that almost no one could contribute to it. Because it required, just for you to spin up Dillinger, you had to, okay, I have to have a Redis instance, I have to have a GitHub app with all my OAuth credentials, I have to have a Dropbox app with all my OAuth credentials, because the way the routes are written, they require all this sort of stuff. That's a big problem. So I recognize this, that I called myself out and said, this is an architectural flaw that I have to fix. And I did it for the better, frankly. And what's interesting was, for the longest time I was thinking, God, I've got to refactor this thing, I've got to re-architect the way that this app is actually written. It's gonna take me so much time. Turns out it took like a day, because most of the logic was already there. It was just actually restructuring and reformatting the way that that logic was written and communicated with each other. So now, if you look at the code base for Dillinger 2.0, it's modular, it's pluggable, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. It's way easier to contribute to. Even if you don't want to contribute, you can pull it down and get started with it really easily. That's a big deal, because if you've written modules or libraries, and you have 10,000 watchers on GitHub, or 100,000 forks, or whatever the stat may be, that doesn't exist in the open source sort of product world. Because it's slightly more complex, there's a lot more going on, it's a more narrow user base. And this isn't just myself, I mean, there's other people that have done open source projects as well that are actual apps or products that don't seem to get a lot of traction. And it's not because people are interested in it, it's just because it's a bit overwhelming, right? So I took that into account with the way that I did the Dillinger 2.0 sort of re-arc, and I don't know, you probably can't see that very well, but on the left-hand side, there's a plugins directory. And even in the plugins, we've got core, Dropbox, and GitHub. So the core is exactly what it sounds like. It's the base level stuff that requires Dillinger to run. But then there's the Dropbox piece. So if you wanted to pull down Dillinger and run it locally or do something else with it, and you don't want to use Dropbox, you don't have to use Dropbox. But if you do, here's the module for it, and it's separated out, right? The same thing for GitHub. If you want to use GitHub, great. If you don't, no big deal. In your actual app, you just end up including the ones that you want. You'll see sort of up there at the top. And again, this is all online, so you can take a look at it later if I'm moving too quickly. But this is what's important to me, is that this particular slide, so you see Dropbox stuff and Dropbox stuff. If you just comment that entire block, app works perfect, you just doesn't have any Dropbox functionality. That was the piece that was missing originally from the product. And not building it in a modular sense. And that's why I'm stressing the point of write really well-written individual modules that do one thing really well, but then also make sure that you structure your application in a way that'll actually benefit from that same mentality. So yeah, you can go to github.com/Mccann/Dillinger if you want to check out more of the way the code is set up and all that good stuff. Now this is another problem that a lot of people have when they're thinking, oh, I've got this idea and it does this one thing, and then I'm just sort of like, great, the GitHub thing works, the Dropbox thing works, and like now I'm done. Or you kind of have like writer's block, what are the features that I should add next? This is actually what's really cool about having an open source product, is that people will tell you what you should actually add next, right? And of course, I'm always like, yeah, you should just fork it and do it yourself. That never works. Well, that doesn't, I don't want to say it never works, it rarely works. But the cool thing is that if you have a product that you're building that is used by people and they like it, they will actually give you direction on what they think, hey, I want Etherpad-like collaborative editing, or I want, support for Evernote. I would have never thought support for Evernote because I don't use Evernote. But people that use Evernote, apparently some of them write in Markdown, so it seems like a natural fit, right? So that's just another piece to the whole, how to, enhance the product. And really quickly, I want to go over a few tools that I use. And you don't have to use these. I've just found for prototyping, proof of concept, and even actually full app development, this stuff works really well. So most people have heard of this framework, and it's debatable about its efficacy or efficiency or whatever. I don't give a shit about any of that. And Express works really good for me, for a lot of stuff that I want to do. Now the difference is that if you want to use something else that is going to provide you with a decent starting point for creating a network app, by all means. But when you couple it with something like Nojitsu's hosting platform, you have a ridiculously fast way to prototype and create proof of concepts of the app ideas or product ideas that you have. So you can spin up Express really quickly and get all of your routes and session cookies, all this stuff out of the box, and then you can push it in Nojitsu immediately thereafter, and you actually have something live up and running in literally minutes, which is really, really empowering. And then completely different from all of that, if you haven't heard of app.js, this is essentially what I was wanting when I wrote Gunner. Gunner was an app starter titanium desktop app. But what I really wanted was something that was just, I could just run Node and get bindings to the lower level APIs for the machine. And app.js does that. So in theory, you could take something like PhotoPipe, or you could take something like Dillinger and wrap it in the context of app.js, and now you've got a native desktop app running on your Mac or Windows or Linux machine. So the last bit is, why would I actually want to build a product? Joe, I love to write modules, I love to do plugins, I like to write thousands of unit tests because I'm a sadist. Why would I actually want to build a product? Well, for me, I'm convinced that even if you're a badass module writer, developer, etc., if you start to think about building a product, it'll actually enhance the way that you write your modules or write your code in general. Because you actually have to start to think about, how is this actually going to be used in the real world? So the final thought I want to leave you with is, in really big text, before you do write that next module, certainly write it, but consider how it'll actually end up being used in an app or in a product. Most people already do this, but in the case that you don't, you should. If you're unsure, like, I think this API signature for my module seems to work great, well, try to just build something with it really quickly. And then you may find out, you know what? I'm changing the way this is actually going to work, because this doesn't seem to follow, say, standard node convention, or the way I thought this API signature would work doesn't actually work that well when I'm trying to actually put it in practical use. And for me, and I think other people out there that are using your modules, will really thank you for doing and taking that sort of that next step and foresight into the way that you write your modules. And that's all I got, so thank you.